Welcome to episode 5 of It's Time to Shine. This is a podcast where we are going to explore together how to shine in dark times. As the days get darker and more cryptic and more deceitful and more discouraging, we've all got to come up to this place where we're shining our light. When I first heard these words, time to shine, they sounded like an audible word from the Lord, because these words, even just 3 words, just stopped me in my tracks. I understood this profound message at the time that God was giving me, because in it He made me understand that there was a sense of urgency about these days, that now is the time. It is time for us to get off of our couches and out of our homes and out of our closets and get out there and present the Lord's light in these dark places. So this is the message that we have heard from Him, and I announce to you that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. That is such a good message that I've decided to do this podcast and introduce you to some people whose light shine very brightly. I've come to realize that we're all luminaries, all of us, but every human is made in the image of God, and we'll explore that in a different episode. But some luminaries shine brighter than others. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Today we're going to look at a life that was lived in a great deal of darkness and that got transferred into a marvelous light and then was seduced back into the darkness and then began to be walked out and lived out successfully in a right relationship with God. I have one of my oldest friends, Suzan, with me. Welcome, Suzan.
Thank you.
She's one of the brightest luminaries you'll ever meet, and you're going to see why in just a minute. But I've known for a long time, and her story is so unusual. Rarely do you meet someone whose life has experienced such highs and lows, such profound darkness, and then such amazing light. And her life, I want just to say, is dramatic. And I want to say thank you, Suzan, for being so brave. Not too many of us want to have the spotlight shine on our good parts and then our mistakes. So I think you've got a lot of courage in doing this, and I just want to say thank you to that in advance. But we have got so much to learn from you and from your life that I decided that it's time for you to come back. So welcome back, Suzan.
Thank you.
Last week, in our episode 4, we went over how you came into my life and how we couldn't have been more different. We lived on different continents. We had different life experiences in the beginning, and it was as if God did this. He just picked us both up and set us in this little playpen and assigned a play date for us and said, there you go, girls, get to know each other because I have plans for your life, right? And so I'm going to ask those of you who are listening to go back and listen to that episode so that because we have so much more to go over. But basically, she came from England and by an odd pathway ended up into my home. We were both pregnant with our first children, and we started this odd relationship where I came from a Christian home. She came from no religious experience at all. And God wove us together amidst a lot of different circumstances. So, Suzan, I want to just say that you are one person who God had His hand on. He pulled you out of the darkness and into His marvelous light. And today, I want you to just describe the home that you came from and just kind of share with us what that was like. And I ask you the question, would you say it was pretty dark?
It was pretty dark. So first of all, my mother was 15 years old when she was pregnant with my oldest brother.
Gosh.
My father is Turkish. They met at Trafalgar Square New Year's Eve. My mother didn't know how she got pregnant, and she went on to have 6 children in the space of 9 years. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of anger, a lot of unmet expectation. My father, coming from a Turkish Muslim family, expected women to be housekeepers and to be cooks and to take care of the children. And my mother had no idea how to do any of those things. And so as a consequence, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and it came out in the form of physical abuse. When we, 6 children, we were all living in one house. We were 4 generations. We were living in a Victorian England terraced house, and the 6 children and my parents, we all slept up in the attic, all of us together.
Oh, that's dark.
Time came, sorry?
That's dark.
Physically as well as, emotionally, it was dark. But we moved out into our own house, but that didn't last very long because my father still is a compulsive gambler, and he didn't pay the rent. So what started off as being a lovely dream, having a house, ended up coming home from school one day, and the bailiffs were on the doorstep, and we had to get everything that we could carry in a pillowcase, and we, the children and my mother, were taken off to a battered women's shelter. My mother was a battered woman, we were battered children. Frustration came out in a very physical way. So moving into the battered children's home, men were not allowed. And there was a very distinct memory that I have that we were all home together, my mom and the brothers and sisters, and there was a pounding on our front door, and the letterbox opened, and a barrel of a gun was put through that letterbox. You don't even have guns in England. But my father had a gun and was literally come gunning for my mother. Chaos, mayhem, screaming. All I remember is that I was the one small enough and able enough to be pushed out the window. I had to run down the street barefoot, pouring rain.
Yeah.
And I got to a phone booth, a telephone box, and I called 999, which that's the emergency services in England. And I called to tell them that my dad is coming to kill my mom. And as a child, after having made that phone call, I was so scared to even go back there because I didn't know what was going to happen. So I just remember being crouched down in the bottom of that telephone box. And I think it was the police that finally came and got me from there. But it was a really scary, really dark time, not knowing what the future was going to be. And for the longest time, I carried this guilt that I was the one responsible.
Of course.
Calling the police to get my dad taken away. It wasn't until much later that I realized that I didn't need to carry that. But as a consequence of living like that, we moved from there. We got put into a council house. The same thing happened, because even though you're living in a council house, which is government housing, you still have to pay the rent. And if you don't pay the rent, you're going to get evicted. So multiple times we got evicted. We moved multiple times. And I realized looking back that I didn't do well in school. I didn't like the structure. I didn't trust the authority. I didn't take to authority and discipline very well because the only authority figures in my life I hadn't been able to trust.
Or untrustworthy, yeah. That's a pretty dark picture. I can just picture you as a little girl crouched down in that call box, and I can't imagine you carrying that. But you had said to me, one of the things that you had said to me in last episode was you had absolutely no foundation in having a relationship with God, but you were spared from so many things. And we both talked about the fact that God had his hand on your life somehow because you survived a lot of very dangerous situations. But I just wanted to say, how do you feel like God really had his hand on your life in these days?
it's not until you look back do you see things so much clearer, but at the time you don't see it. So even something as simple as going to school, and at that time, I don't know whether they still do, but we had assembly every morning, and we had what they call religious instruction in classes. But every day at school, we would meet in assembly. We would sing songs, sing hymns, and that later became the foundation of, my Christian life. But also, really important was my mom would send us up the road to church.
Yeah.
Wherever we lived, she found a local church because she needed some peace on a Sunday morning. She never came with us, but she just sent us up the road. And we went with our little pennies to put in the offering. But as a result of doing that, these 6, children showing up on their own, we got put on the radar of the church. And so people would come and visit Mom every now and then. But the most important thing was we were the recipients of food baskets at Christmas. And still to this day, my brothers and sisters and I, we talk about how special those food baskets were. What a joy, what a treat to get cans of meat.
Yes.
We never had. There were many times we went to bed with sugar sandwiches. That's the only thing we had to eat, bread and sugar.
Oh my.
That was our dinner. So to be given these baskets of food that contained meat and fresh fruits and all other delicacies that we never had was really, really special.
Remarkable.
And it's something that has been tremendously impactful.
So just to reiterate to the audience, we think sometimes that our time to shine shows up in giving baskets and shoe boxes to kids, and sometimes I feel guilty when I do that, thinking this isn't going to do that much. So it's really good to hear from you that is a very it made a big impact. And now to kind of speed these up and get out of these dark times, but you said to me, was there anyone, you had nobody in your family, did you, or did you have any inheritance?
At the time I didn't know, but again, looking back and now that I'm older, I realized that my great-grandmother on my mother's side, so my grandfather's mother on my mother's side, she was a missionary. I had no idea. It wasn't anything that was ever spoken about, and I came to know just by happenstance. I think my mother mentioned it in passing one time. But all I can say is that she must have prayed for us.
She must have
prayed.
So those of you who are in the elder years of your life and think, oh, there's nothing you can do, how important is it that you pray for your children, your children's children, and future generations? Because I bet you 2 bits, that's what's happened. Okay, now, Suzanne, let's talk about it. You came out of England through a marriage to a Muslim man, and you came into Houston, Texas, where you were in a relationship. He was in a relationship with my husband, and that's where we met. And I remember you telling me that you just wanted to be near me and in my home because there was something that I had that you saw, and you said it was like a moth to a flame.
Absolutely.
And we're not going to go over how you came to be transferred out of the darkness into the light, but that's exactly what happened. You were just literally picked up, put into a place where you could hear more about the faithfulness of God, and you began to witness it simply through our lifestyles, messy as they were. So here's my next question to you. Having come from so much darkness, and really in that marriage to a man of a different faith, Muslim, there was a lot of oppression and isolation. What was it like for you to come out of that kind of a darkness and you were introduced to Jesus Christ? You invited him in your life. You started going to church and you started to get a lot of attention because of your past. What was it like going from that much darkness to the light?
Indescribable. It's just exhilarating. I felt such freedom. I felt such love. I felt absolutely invincible. I would go for my walk and talk every morning and completely believe with all my heart that Jesus was right there with me, because he was. And I just felt absolutely invincible. And I wanted to tell everyone about Jesus. And I thought at the time that the way I thought being a Christian was the way everyone thought. I later on I came to realize. So I went to Second Baptist Church. Dr. Young is the pastor there, and one of the things that he said to me, not to me, he said it from the pulpit. He said, just because you stand in a garage doesn't make you a car, no more than just because you sit in the pew of a church makes you a Christian.
That's true. I remember him saying that.
That
Blew
was
your mind.
mind-blowing to me, because I'm thinking, why would you even come to church if you're not a Christian?
Yeah.
It never occurred to me to go to church.
And be something else.
And I wanted to become a Christian.
Well, here's the next stage. The next stage was your testimony was so powerful that Dr. Young invited you to speak about it and testify from the pulpit. And that was the only time to that date that he had allowed a woman to occupy the pulpit. And I remember your testimony was so powerful. And I just bring that up because you made one statement about
I remember.
Oh, you remember that one statement? What was that? Let's say that before we have to move on. But how?
Don't let God be the best kept secret in your life.
That's right. And so you're saying that for us today too, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But you know, I have often said that it's dangerous for us to put up young Christians in public situations like that was so public, because you're not prepared for the onslaught of what the enemy has for you. And you, having been his for so long, walking in the light, I'll never forget Suzanne marching around singing that song, "Our God is an awesome God, He reigns." And we would bring her to church, and she would be dressed like a European English girl, that the leather skirt and the fishnets. You know, it was like, do I tell her or do you? But it didn't matter. You came, and the funny thing was, you were so excited to be saved that you just lifted your hands to the Lord, and you were lost in the love of God, and you showed all of us what it really meant to worship God. And that was such a fun time to watch you. But then, after walking in the light for a couple of years, we began to lose track of you, and your life began to slide into this dark cycle for a while. And you and I talked about it. After you got saved, did you enter into any kind of Bible studies, or were you discipled? What happened after that?
So I was discipled. A young man came alongside of me, and I don't remember if he told me or he just took it upon himself, but he was gonna disciple me. And so, okay, I didn't know any different, sure. So I got a little book on, how to be a Christian and things that, you're supposed to do. And I remember meeting with him on a Sunday evening after church, and we'll go around to his apartment and we would pray. And we prayed a lot. There was never any come-ons, I felt safe with him.
Didn't you tell me you even held hands and prayed with him?
Yeah, we would sit cross-legged on the floor, and we would hold hands, and we would pray, and sometimes almost kind of felt like we were levitating. I mean, it was a really, really deep time of prayer. But in my naivety, I didn't realize that prayer produces intimacy. And what we were doing between the two of us was producing an intimacy that I was oblivious of.
Yeah.
He wasn't.
And the first thing that I would say is, what we have to establish right now, that no man should ever be discipling a single woman. And that's just a rule of thumb, because we all know that though that man had a good heart, that you can see anybody would be attracted to Suzanne. So that's already. So what I remember about her story is that here she is walking with the Lord. She was saved. She was transferred out of the dark domain into the kingdom of light. There was no doubt about that. But you know, the enemy had a plan for her. And so what did he send in? The thing that was always her downfall, men, even good men. And so that relationship really had to end rather quickly and with his heart broken. But then you began to still walk along with other men. And I remember one man in particular, one of the things Suzanne has is such a good heart, and she so wants to help. So what she did was she began to help this man in his salon, volunteered her time to be a receptionist. The only problem was what, Suzanne?
The only problem was he was an addict and pretty unstable emotionally and spiritually. But I was aware, but I guess I thought I could help. But I was still very young in the faith, and I thought I was doing a good thing.
And so were you in a Bible study then? Were you in any Bible studies? Because that's what we think discipleship is learning the Bible. Were you in some?
I went to some Bible studies, but what it was given a book, filled in the blanks, went to a group meeting, after, I think once a week, just to see if you got the right answers, things like that. Yeah. But there was never any depth. There was never any true explanation of the word. It was, this is the question, find the scripture, here's the answer. There was never any, what does it mean?
Application, yeah.
How do you interpret that? And there wasn't any real sense of community. We came together, we answered the questions on our own at home, and then we came together once a week, and then we all went home again.
So this is how I see your slide back into these dark times again, because you were not involved in a healthy community of people who took the time to say, hey, how are you doing, and where are you in life, and do you understand how to live this out in this particular scripture? And there was no accountability. There was nobody, and I feel so regretful of that. We were in the process of moving to a different city, and I was not equipped to disciple anybody because you and I both were dealing with very young children. But because of that, I think Suzanne was vulnerable. And so she kept coming into these different relationships with men who, one in particular, a really good man she thought that she met in church, had a really great Christian family. And I'm going to kind of slide past this one. I'm going to tell your story, Suzanne, because we need to wrap up into the good parts. But she actually married him. And that is when she first confronted the fact that Christians can be very deceitful. Why, Suzanne?
Because I wasn't told the truth about that person that I married. The family knew all about his past and his addictive personality.
Wasn't he addicted to crack?
Yes.
Yes, he was.
And I didn't know. And I know it sounds kind of stupid, but I really didn't know. I knew there was something wrong. I could never smell anything on him. So it wasn't alcohol, but it was something.
So you got out of that one quickly, but what was it that it left you with this sour taste in your mouth? And I remember, what did you tell me about how confusing that was and the deception?
Yeah, it was very confusing because I didn't trust. I started to lose my trust. I mean, I thought, being a new Christian, that, again, it's naive on my part, but I believed that I had met a new culture of men and people, and that's not so. And just because people claim to be Christians and go to church, there's still a lot of deception in them, and a lot of withholding from the truth is just as damaging as telling a lie.
Exactly.
And that's what I was in the middle of, a lot of withholding, and it was extremely damaging.
Extremely damaging. So now that you're unbalanced here, you're still walking along with this desperate need to belong to someone, to have a covering. And so you're working with this other guy who's also an addict. And then you met the third round of men that actually took you in. And we have to really wrap this up. But you did marry him, even though God told you not to do it. And I'm going to have to share, we've got about 5 minutes left. But what happened in this relationship was he just talked and talked and talked and talked and offered business opportunities, and they just kind of walked along until she was trapped into a relationship she knew she wasn't right for, and he wasn't right for her. And those were very sad years that put her in a prison that lasted how long, Suzanne?
30
long years. And so what I want to say here is that sometimes when we make the wrong choice, when we just ignore God's voice, he lets us just get into that prison and sit there and wait a while before we're released. And tell me what happened. How did you get out of that? I was asking you how you got out, and you said what?
First of all, God was with me all along. I never doubted that he was there, even in the midst of my despair and in the midst of my darkness. I never doubted that he was there because of the real salvation experience that I had with him before. But what happened was he went quiet and I went quiet. And when I finally made my decision that I had had enough and I had to get out of this relationship, because I was at a point where I was about to die. The person of me was this far away from dying and being snubbed out completely. My light is going. And so I had to make a choice. So I made that decision. And when I did, I cried out to the Lord. And he said to me, "Okay, my child, take my hand and I'll lead you out." And that's what he did, step by step, moment by moment. It took months of planning and preparation for me to be able to walk out of the captivity that I was in.
And you told me, since we have to wrap up, we only have a couple more minutes, but you told me that you would wake up and say, "God, what do I need to do today?" And he would tell you what to do, and you would do it. And you had expressed to me that you never said that God said to you, "Get out." That was your decision. But when you came to that decision, God provided a way for you to get out. And that's where you are now. And we have to wrap up. But now the difference is every day you do things differently. In 30 seconds, what can you tell us about the difference in walking in life?
God first. That's it. My quiet time in the morning is the most important thing. I seek his will, his way, his light. I don't want to breathe without him. I don't trust myself. I do not make good decisions on my own. It's taken me 65 years of life to come to realization that I'm not good at making my decisions. So I give it to him every step of the way, and I don't ever
want to do that again. Well, in conclusion, I have watched her. I've walked through this last part of her life that was so tough, and I've watched her wrestle with the demons that have had control of her life for years and overcome them. And now she has learned how to walk in the light in a successful relationship with the Lord. And now she's transformed. No longer she's that grubby little caterpillar who's eating all the food he can. She has now become a butterfly, and she's going to be sent out. In fact, for the last statement of Time to Shine, tell us where you're going and what you're going to do.
Okay, I'm going to the island of Cyprus, which is my father's homeland, which has footsteps of Paul and the apostles all over it. And I'm going back to the island of Cyprus to claim it back to the Lord and to shine some light in the midst of that Muslim area.
So next time we see you, possibly from the podcast Time to Shine, Cyprus, We will see you on the island, hopefully, and we wish you Godspeed and blessings, and let us know how you're doing. So, until next time, shine your light in dark places.